It's Lisa from Been There, Got Out. As usual, I'm very excited for today's guest. We actually met a few weeks ago, and he has a very interesting history. We first met because I was like, oh, he's an attorney, and he has experience with family law, and he's a guardian ad litem, and he is an adult alienated child who wrote this amazing book. I'm not just saying that because I'm really picky. I was an English teacher, I'm a writer myself, and I love to read. But he wrote this book called Pretend They Are Dead, and about his own experience. And it's pretty extreme of what happened to him when he was a child in terms of his family system and how it was severely disrupted and the impact that it had on him, his family. He's actually a twin as well. His father, his mother, his stepfather, and I want to talk about how all, here he is, how all of this has influenced his choice of day. I mean, I just was on a call with him and was saying that I don't that I was that a lot of people have great stories, but they're not good writers. And Steve, I just told you you are a really excellent writer. This was a
Thanks.
riveting story, and I really recommend it. So again, for those of you who are just coming on, you can see my little notes and lots of dog ears, but I'm not going to get into all that because we don't have time. But anyway, Steve, before you even say who you are, can you just tell us the significance of the title of the book? And I know the book was 10 years in the making. Pretend They Are Dead.
Sure. Yeah, without going through all of it, the reality is that Pretend They Are Dead came from a story, a magazine article that I found many, many years after my biological father had passed away. And of course, he had disappeared and given us up for adoption. That's part of the story. And in the magazine article, he writes about his last night that he spent with his kids. So he actually wrote a story about the last night he spent with us. And he says, describes that he had gone to a psychiatrist, and a psychiatrist said, just pretend they are dead. And so when he dropped us off, never came back again. And that's what he did. That was his rationale, pretend they are dead. And so we
And how
never
old
saw
were
him.
you? How old were you and your sister at the time?
Around seven. There's around seven, eight-ish, somewhere in there. So it's one thing to be given up when you're a baby, so you don't know. It's another thing to be, tossed aside when you know what's going on.
Right. And I think about from 0 to 7 are the formative years.
Yeah,
So
no,
you had already established a bond. But before we even get into it, tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about your background. Because when we met, I was like, this is really, really interesting to give all of this experience, life experience, professional experience that really connects to the work that Chris and I do with Been There, Got Out.
Yeah, oh no, I think that we match in all four corners. I think yeah, so I mean I'm a lawyer in Orlando, Florida. Been practicing law for 7 years, and I'm a personal injury lawyer. I started out as an insurance defense lawyer, didn't like representing insurance companies, so I've been doing trial work ever since then. Part of my practice has involved representing a lot of children as a guardian ad litem, pro bono, because we know, and I think I'm sure a lot of your listeners have been in families that have been torn apart or have seen their kids get in the middle. And so I jump in and I represent the best interests of the child, um, trying to, whether or not they should stay with their parents, foster care, those kinds of things. So um, that's who I am right now, father of five. I'm married for the third time, but I think this is the last one. I think we're good. And I've been through several divorces, and we can get into that as much as you want to. But so that's kind of the general picture.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I know this is kind of a big question, but let's kind of start at the beginning with what happened with your family. So you were together, your biological parents,
Sure.
and then what happened?
Yeah. So what happened is, my father dropped us off, never came back, and one day we showed up. My grandparents actually took us on a weekend trip to Sturbridge Village. I'll never forget it, in Massachusetts. The only time I've ever been there. And they never took us anywhere. We come back to the house, and a new man has moved into our house with his four kids. And my mother announces that she has married him. And we had met him once or twice before at the most, but just like my father leaving and nobody telling us, nobody told us that she didn't tell us that she's getting married. So we show up. um, there's this man in our house, and we we were told this is your new dad, basically. And he laid out some very punitive, like corporal punishment rules that we had to live by. And I described, the transition going through that in the book. Not being allowed to walk in the front door, not being allowed to sit on the furniture, never ate a meal with my parents. We weren't allowed to eat at the same time, weren't allowed in the kitchen. Um, there was a lot of emotional damage because of his big mouth and his the way he treated us. And of course, back then, men in that age, there was physical, with the belt and other means. There was violence in the house. Um, and I discovered much more about that later on when I talked to my mother. But so that was so all of a sudden we went from 3 kids to 7 kids. I called it the Brady Bunch from hell, because the
Yeah.
Brady Bunch was happening then. And it's like, okay, boom, you're thrown together, no counseling, no therapy, no, really no interaction with the other kids. And we got adopted together. Um, my last name changed. And one thing too I want to tell you, Lisa, is like we were adopted together, when I was 7 or 8, somewhere in there. Um, and I have always thought of my brothers and sisters as my brothers and sisters, regardless of blood. As much as I
Mhm.
hated my father, the one who adopted me, Richard Eichenblatt, uh, my brothers and sisters, I mean, even though I don't necessarily get along perfectly with all of them, they are my brothers and sisters. And we were raised we didn't tell people that we weren't related. It was, everybody thought, we were true, full-blooded brothers and sisters. So I guess my point is, blood doesn't really determine, love.
Yeah. But I mean, you just mentioned like a whole bunch of major disruptions to your life all around the same time. Your father left. You came back and installed like a brand new person who now that's your new father. So just swapping out a primary attachment. Then you have all these siblings all of a sudden. Your name changes. I know later you completely moved
Yeah.
from New Jersey to
Yes.
Florida. But I mean, how we always think about consistency, stability, and routine for kids going through normal divorce. How did this affect you to have such like major disruptions, do you think, at that time?
At the time when you're a kid, you're just kind of like accept, like, day to day what's handed to you. I mean, it's not like I had a choice. I also, don't forget my parents, my biological father, my mother, they used to fight all the time. So they went through that divorce. So I went through that. And I was used to like turmoil and chaos in the house. And I learned how to compartmentalize. I became a professional compartmentalizer from an early age, where I just pushed stuff aside, shoved it aside. So when these new disruptions come, um, I just went with it. I mean, day to day, I didn't have any. I was quiet, I was really quiet. And um, I was very independent from a young age. So, I mean, it was kind of survival. I just learned to survive sort of on my own in that, emotionally. And I also lost my emotions. I think later on I learned, by compartmentalizing as much as I had to survive, I lost track of my emotions, feelings. I write in the book, feeling of no feeling. I mean, that is a feeling.
Yeah, but I just think of the all the levels of grief that you must have experienced but didn't have words for because you were so little. And like you said, kids, especially that age, they just kind of accept it. I mean, you have no choice. Did you see a difference between what it was like for you and for your sister and your other siblings? I mean, your biological was your brother, right? You have a little brother?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for my sister, it was really hard, and we all have our own journeys. So uh, for her, it was really hard because my new father, new family came in, and there was another girl um, who became my sister, and they are exactly the same age as my twin sister and her. They were all this exact same age, and girls at that age, I'm no expert, but there was a lot of competition. My
Hmm.
twin sister had a lot of friends, and all of a sudden you have this stranger walking in the house, and she's expected to try to join my sister and her friends, and it created this incredibly destructive competitive atmosphere. And I didn't write about this in the book, but they actually had to build a wall between their they shared a room, and then they would fight so often, so much, that my father built a wall so that they could be separated. So that was a really tough, she had a really tough journey. And when I wrote the book, I sent it to her to look at before I published it, just to say, I just wanted her to tell me, hey, is there anything in here that looks like it's grossly exaggerated or accuracy or whatever? And she called me and she said, you weren't tough enough. And I was like, really? And she said, you don't talk about some of the other things. And I explained to her, this is my journey, not yours, but
Yeah.
her journey was bad in another way.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, there's so much more detail in the book, obviously, but let's jump ahead to where your father literally crashed into your life. And when I read that, I thought he died. Like, I mean, the description, I thought it was like your father died right in front of your eyes. Your
Sure.
biological father.
Right, my biological father. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. Like when I look back at it still, uh, I was working at a tennis court. I was by myself. It was July 4th, 1975. So
Yes. Say
probably
how old you were
before,
at the time, just
eh,
in.
I was probably thinking I was 16. I was
Mhm.
16 at the time, hadn't seen my biological father for probably 7 or 8 years. And remember, he was a veterinarian that worked in the same town. His office was 2 miles from my house growing up. So and I'm not sure exactly where he lived at that time, but it was all close and it was all in the zone. But I was working the tennis court, sweeping the courts. I hear this horrible scream, like as tires like squealing, brakes hitting the pavement, and this car crashed into a telephone pole right by where I was standing, like right on the other side of the fence. I run around, I see somebody laid out on the windshield. I go to the payphone and it's like slow motion. You're just, I
Yeah.
mean, I was just a kid, but like, it's just, you're just reacting. And um, I went to the payphone and called the operator because there wasn't 911 back then. And,
Mhm.
um, ambulance and the police come, and I go back up there and he's laid out. They had him on the side of the car, and he was like in and out of consciousness. His face is bloodied and cut in half, and he was a mess. And I looked, I started to walk away, and I felt like, how you can feel like somebody looking at you, even though you're not
Mhm.
seeing them, you just feel that
Yeah.
you have that sense. And so I felt this energy on my back, and I turned and I looked at him, and he was conscious then, and he'd opened, and one of his eyes, he described it, was cut in half, basically, and his
Yeah.
skin was hanging down. And, I just turned, and then I thought that I got this really weird feeling. I turned around, to get on my Schwinn 10 speed um, bike, and I was going to ride away. And then as I was walking away, the police officer pulled out his wallet. I'll never forget it, and said, does anybody know this man? And he said his name, Alan Nessel. And of course, that was my biological father. Um, so I got on my bike, I rode away. I didn't say anything to the cop, and I didn't tell anybody I was there for 40 years.
Yeah. Incredible. I mean, just hearing, like, I read it, but hearing you talk about it, my skin is literally like tingling.
He,
It's so crazy.
Well, and I mean, he should have died. And I found out later, he was, he real in the hospital for a long time, 250 stitches, broken ribs, spleen, all these other body parts. And, but I got on my bike, rode away, and put it out of my mind. It sounds crazy, but, I'm sure, you always hear these stories about, people who are raped as a child or something bad happens to them and they forget about it and then it shows up in your brain later on. I mean, I didn't forget about it, but I didn't dwell on it. I just pushed it inside because I didn't have anywhere to turn to talk to about it.
Yeah. I mean, before I want to keep talking about that, but I thought of something I hadn't asked before. So your father lived, you weren't sure where, but he worked in the same town, just a couple miles away. What was your mother's explanation for why he never visited anymore?
I mean, I think it was more instead of an explanation for why he didn't visit, it was more of a rationale for why the way we can be one big loving family is by moving him to the side and you not seeing him anymore. I mean, I don't remember how the conversations went because I wasn't part of the discussion,
Hmm.
but so she didn't have a lot of explanation. But my father that adopted me, he was is very mean, very he was a boss, very very bossy. He's a bully, bossy bully, all those things. So there wasn't, that was the law. And the law was my biological father was out of our life and we weren't going to see him again. And, no pictures, never discussed it, um, just moved on.
So the title pretend they are dead kind of goes both ways.
It absolutely does. And when you think about it, it probably practically happens in a lot of divorces or situations where you try to put that person in the back of your mind and forget about him. But these are his kids, these are his kids. And I don't know how you do that. I have 5 kids. I don't know how anybody could do that.
Yeah, yeah. So back to the crash, you you thought it might be a coincidence, maybe, or but it wasn't a coincidence. The point is, it wasn't a coincidence. Um,
No,
and that we learned later that your father had tried to see you. He knew that that's where you worked.
right.
How common do you think it is for a parent who has been cut out of a child's life, especially now with what you do professionally, to keep trying to make contact or to watch them from a distance?
I think it's very common. I really do. If of course, it all depends on the relationship. But like in this scenario, I found out later that he's quasi stalked us. Like he would watch us from a distance. Maybe he would drive by our house. He never had the courage to stop or talk to us. And
Hmm.
on the crash, when the crash happened, I don't know whether or not he would have pulled in to talk to me because he
Hmm.
had a telephone pole. I don't think he would have. I think he just was driving by because he had hired an investigator to find us and to take pictures because he had asked my mother for pictures and she said no. And so he found out that I worked at this tennis club. Um, and then I found out the details, later, more of the details later on because I got in touch with one of his employees and people in his life as part of my research for the book.
Yeah. Do you know, like I have a friend who has not the same, obviously, story, but a situation where her father got the message that he was not wanted, and her mother had also remarried, and her stepfather was similar to yours in some ways. And so he signed away his parental rights. That meant he was not legally able to contact her. He also, and this is at the beginning of our upcoming book, When Your Ex Turns the Kids Against You, but she said that she used to see him near the bus stop and she'd get really scared. So she'd stay on the bus longer. And then sometimes she'd find flowers on the windshield of her car that she knew
Uh,
were from him. But he was legally prohibited until she was 18. Was your father legally prohibited because you had been adopted by
I,
Richard?
th- I think that was part of the agreement was that he would give us up. And as far as whether or not he had agreed not to see us, he didn't see us. So I don't know if it was out of fear or I think the legal agreement was he wasn't to see us or have any contact with us.
Mm-hmm. So you guys were still so young and you compartmentalized and sort of like just accepted it. Did you ever miss him when you were little? Do you remember?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I don't rem I remember being disappointed, like disappointed that he wasn't around. And I remember because we didn't, listen. he wasn't the greatest father of all time. The
Yeah,
truth is, besides the fact that he left us, he was very busy with his veterinary practice. He had other things happening, so he didn't spend a lot of time with me as it was. So I don't really remember. I don't remember really missing him. Maybe because that we're a new father was shoved into my life so quickly, who I did miss. And I think this is a really important point. And I think people going through divorce don't evaluate this the way they should, or maybe they do now. But I did miss my grandparents. I mean, because not only did I lose him, but I
Mhm.
lost my grandparents and my uncle, who I really loved. So I never saw my grandfather again. That's still like, and that's, I think, the collateral damage. I mean, my relationship with my grandparents was stronger than it was with my father. So I really miss them. I still
Yeah.
miss them.
Yeah. And I know in the book there's pictures of them with the car and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So, what, how do you think though, now from the work you do and seeing the other side and everything that you found out much later with being able to look through his papers and his writings, he was a writer, right? He taught creative writing.
Right.
How do you
Yeah.
think this impacted him as a father who had basically been cut out on some level of his children's lives? I mean, he thought he was doing the right thing by letting Richard adopt you. That was what was positioned to him as well, right?
Yes, yeah. I think it ruined his life. I think there's no question in my mind that it ruined his life because I've read, and anybody who reads the book will find out that he was a writer. He left thousands of pages of personal journals between 1960 and 1990. He's a prolific letter writer, and I was lucky enough to run into his cousin who gave me all of that. And I mean, he wrote every day about everything that happened. And he did go on to marry his nurse, have a couple other kids that I found about later. That relationship didn't last very long, but there's no doubt that from reading everything, he thought about us all the time. And he after the car crash, he became addicted to Valium and pain medications, and he had some drug abuse issues.
Hmm. Yeah. And you talk a little bit about that when you met him again. Can you tell us a little bit about what prompted that to
uh
reach out to him and what it was like? I mean, I know because I read it, but
yeah, yeah, sure. When I look back at that now, I'm like, man, I had a lot of courage for doing
yeah.
that. Because that was scary. I just felt like I needed to find out what happened, like what happened to him, where he went, why he went. And I hated my adopted father. I mean, he was a bastard. I mean,
Yeah.
and my mother was scared to death of him. And I always wanted a dad, like somebody that cared. And so I decided I was living in Florida at that point, and I was in college, and I wound up going up to New Jersey, where, he's a veterinarian in the same place he's been for, decades. And I mean, that scene I wrote about standing outside the door and trying to get the courage to go in with my friend Billy, who I still am in touch with. And
Hmm.
and we've talked about it. And he basically like shoved me in the door and said, just, get your butt in there. Because it was,
Hmm.
knocking on the door and then walking in. And then as I walked in, he came walking out and he asked, hey, could I help you? And
Yeah,
he
he
didn't
didn't even
recognize me.
recognize. Yeah.
He
I
didn't
mean that.
recognize me. Yeah. And he was like a person, with a personality disorder, like very not autistic, but like on this, you'd say now he was on the spectrum. He was
Hmm.
very socially uncomfortable, probably even before the accident, but
Hmm.
since the accident. And when I met him, he was a mess. I mean, he was not a well person, couldn't look you in the eye, mumbled,
Hmm.
really kind of spit coming out the side of his mouth, I remember,
Hmm.
and always smoking cigarettes. But he it took him a while to recognize me because I'm like, hey, I'm Steven, I'm your son. And then
And
once
you
he
were
did
in
recognize,
college, so it wasn't like you
yeah,
were a full-blown adult,
yeah,
decades
yeah,
later. This is just a
right,
few years after the accident. If you were around
yeah.
16 with the accident, so college, you think like, 19, 20, 21 max.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, I mean, so he once he figured out who I was, um, then he hugged me like in the way he was capable of hugging, and we had a conversation. I got to spend some time with him, but he and even and Lisa, with all of your background, I'd be interested. I never asked him about the accident. I was his face was pretty messed up, and but I never asked him if he knew I was there,
Mm,
which I didn't find out until years later. And he was shocked when I told him that my father that had adopted me was not was violent, and that
yeah.
I'd gotten in altercations and fights with him, and that I wasn't a happy family. Like in his mind, in my biological father's mind, he's thinking, oh, it's the Brady Bunch. They're going to be happy. They've got money. They've got this. They've got that, and that's bullshit. Excuse
Yeah.
my language.
No, it's okay.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
censorship.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like, like I still, when I go back and I'll read through some of his notes, and he'll say, "Well, the kids never came to see me," like, and it's like he was the adult, we're the
Yeah.
kids, and I'm the one who actually did come and see him because I actually knocked on his door, and my brother, my brother, also eventually saw him, and he claims it's the biggest mistake he's made in his life is reconnecting because
Really?
yeah,
Why?
he totally
I mean, if
regrets
you
it.
want to say, I don't know if you want to say.
Yeah, I don't really know. I think he just felt like he was a stranger, and he was not a well person, and he just
Mm,
didn't want anything to do with it.
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's almost like a sense of abandonment on top of everything else, and like
Oh,
trying to,
absolutely.
like you as the parent is the adult, and I can definitely relate with some of this with my own situation where, like, why is it on a child to make the effort and chase after a parent? Like, the parent is supposed to love a child unconditionally and protect them and be there. Like,
Yeah.
where did he go? Like, what was he thinking
Yeah.
that he just thought that this was okay?
Yeah, it's and as much as I try to reconcile all that in the book and try to forgive him and all that, I forgive him, but I don't forgive him. I don't buy his excuse pretending they're dead. I mean, I'm a father, man. I mean, there's no way. I mean, you'd have to kill me before telling me I couldn't see my kids. I mean,
Yeah.
that's and it's not, one of I don't write about this in the book, or maybe I mentioned it, but my second wife, who I wasn't married to her very long, but she took off with my son to Georgia.
Mhm.
I mean, she didn't kidnap him. We had an agreement, and I started going to see him. And I drove from Florida, from Orlando to Atlanta, Georgia, every other weekend for like 4 years, and that's like a
Mhm.
7-hour drive. Yeah,
Yeah.
just to spend the weekend with him, because I was not going to do to my kids what my father had done to me. There was no way. So, um, it wasn't easy, but it worked. I got tired of driving so much, and my friends thought I was crazy, but I was not gonna not be there for them.
Yeah. I mean, and it's wonderful. I imagine your son probably didn't even think about it.
No, no, he really didn't. I have to remind him sometimes. I drove every 2 weeks now. He's 20 years old now, like to
Yeah.
see you, and I have the pictures to prove it. But uh, I can tell you where all the Starbucks are between Orlando and Powder Springs, Georgia.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, we could talk about this for so long, but I don't want to like take up all the time. So I'm going to jump to your career choice that, you mentioned you've done guardian ad litem work, pro bono. Like, how do you think the impact of Richard and all of this led to your choice of doing what you do now?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question, and it's really helped me a lot in a couple ways that well, one way will definitely surprise you. I have a lot of anger inside of me because of what happened, and I was able to use that anger as a lawyer to, I'm not afraid of anybody because nobody could be worse than that bastard. And
Mm,
so when other older lawyers would try to intimidate you or whatever, so I didn't have any fear. And I also had that voice in my head, his voice, saying I would never make anything myself. I'd be a loser. I'm going to be a failure. I mean, that's what, that voice was in my head for many years. So part of it, so you're driven sort of, it's like a push and pull. I mean, I was driven, part of it was to prove him wrong, but of course I knew from an early age that I wanted to help people. Like I always had that part, like, and I was a huge reader, and I used to read all these books, about, kids who overcome all these horrible things. Horatio Alger books, which are like from the 1930s and stuff.
Mhm.
I used to read all those books and about people overcoming horrible things, and that is also part of the reason why. When I went to college, I didn't even know why I was there. I flunked out pretty quickly, and part of it was because I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I read Centennial, and I
Mhm.
read Chesapeake, and I read all these
James
books by
Michener, right?
James. Yeah, and they're
Yeah.
all like 2,000 pages long. I mean,
Yeah.
like it's like
Huge.
crazy. But I read, and so I graduated from high school with a 2.1. But I would be
Mhm.
in my closet reading books that were 2,000 pages long. I mean,
Mhm.
and those books. So part of it, what inspired me was with the James Michener books. You take one piece of property and build a story about what happened, and like the Native Americans, they obviously got persecuted and swept away by us immigrants or whatever you want to call it. And I decided when I went to Florida State, that's where I started as a Florida State Seminoles. I want to help the Seminole Indians. So
Mhm.
and and this was back in 1980-ish, when right now there wasn't casinos. No Seminole had ever graduated at that point from a Florida school. I actually went to go. I actually went and met with the Florida Governor's Council on Indian Affairs. This is all on my own. I was like 18, and I went to
Mhm.
work for him,
Wow.
and I got to work on the reservations. But of course, I didn't bother to like check out of school. I just stopped going to class. That was not
Mhm.
good. And so then I decided. Uh, to go to Israel. And that was all. And during that time period is when I realized if I really want to help people, um, the only way I can do it is by going back, getting my degree, and becoming an attorney that will give me the power to help kids, especially, and others. So that's kind of what it all kind of played together. And I've asked myself, would I have done something different if my life had been different? Which is this the life you're meant to lead? And um, I think I'm here for a reason. I've helped a lot of people for a reason, but I've been through a lot of rough times too, because you know I was never unstable, but hard to have relationships when you have all this baggage.
Yeah. I mean, I also was thinking, and you didn't mention it, but that it sounds like you have a sense of like, I need justice. I need to make
Uh,
sure other people have justice. So in your
mm,
work as a custody
yeah,
evaluator, guardian ad litem, how do you notice that coming out? Where like, I need justice for these children. Like, is there anything you notice that you do as
sure.
a GAL or your back, how it impacts what you do?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, like growing up the way I did in that house, going through an adoption and being stuck in a family with people that I didn't know at the time, and then as being appointed as a GAL, and it always depends on how old the kid is, but people will take kids into foster care that have no business taking kids. They're just doing it for the money. I've seen
Mhm.
it firsthand. So it's my job as a guardian ad litem is to evaluate, the foster care home, the parental home, if the parents are trying to get the kids back. And sometimes it means you have to take a hard position because the state may be saying, we want these kids back with their parents. And I, as a GAL, the judge looks at me and says, what is your opinion? And sometimes, as much as I hate to see kids torn from their biological parents, I have kind of street sense of what's really happening with the parents. And so sometimes you have to say, no, I don't think it's good for them to go back with the parents until they, do the parenting plan. But I've had to testify multiple times, and I don't always take the easiest position. I
Mhm.
don't, because I want
Yeah.
to do what's right for the kids. So, um, and that's not always easy.
Yeah. How often do you see situations, not as extreme as yours, but let's say where I mean, I know you're not a divorce attorney, but where a couple is going through a divorce and somebody is trying to cut out one of the parents.
I've definitely seen it. Not as much as a GAL, but uh, as a person who's gone through, two divorces, um, it seems like, and I'm a lawyer, I have lots of friends or people that will call me for advice. Um, and so many times you just see outrageous behavior, just crazy, really crazy behavior, and kids stuck in the middle, and the kids are just hurting. I coached Little League and I coached soccer, did all those things, and there's always a couple kids, you just could see it on their face. You could see
Hmm.
the pain. And you see the dad's on one side of the field and the mom's on the other side of the field, and the coach is told there's a restraining order. And I mean, you definitely see it. It's just people throw their kids in the middle. It's very selfish. And yeah, I could go on.
Yeah, I'm sure.
uh,
Yeah.
it's painful. It's painful, and sometimes I'll get a call as a lawyer that there's a domestic abuse situation,
Hmm.
looking for advice and what to do. And I've called the shelter multiple times for women who call desperate, and trying to escape their ex or whoever it is.
Hmm. Yeah, I was thinking, just to start winding up, like, what advice do you have for parents whose kids have been taken from them emotionally, maybe physically as well, but where they're just feeling such a deep sense of anger that this is being allowed to happen, and that sense of injustice and especially despair, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like, my ex is getting away with this, and everything is taking so long before I can get
It's
before a judge, or the guardian is taking so long to do a report. And in the meantime, like, week after week, month after month, I haven't seen my kid, and now I'm becoming a stranger to them, and they're going to forget about me. I mean, that's who we deal with all day, every day. They are
uh,
freaking out.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's so hard. It's so hard. It's so hard because the justice system is just completely overloaded, so it moves slow, and there's not much you can do to speed it up unless it's an emergency.
Mhm.
Um, so the justice system moves slow, so inevitably, like in your situation, with the situation you're talking about, you tell the people going through it that don't get your hopes up. It's gonna be a slow process. There's nothing you can really do to speed it up because there's so many people in need. It's not the state's fault. It's not just the state. There's just tons of people that need help. And
Mhm.
so if you need help and you're desperate, get get the resources or find the resources, whether it's through your church or your temple or the kids' schools. A lot of schools will do counseling for in divorce situations if the kids are going through it.
Mhm.
Obviously, get mental health therapy, get therapy. I mean, anger is not going to get your kids back faster. It's going to make
Mhm.
it far worse, and it really is. And it's hard to, when you have an ex who you hate hates you, or they're doing ridiculous things, you have to try to hold your head up as much as you can, and because it's not going to help you or your kids for you to get angry and for you to engage in that kind of battle. And I know you deal with it, Lisa. And I have friends, who are professionals, like doctors or businessmen that cannot be in a room with their exes, and their kids are adults and they still cannot be together. It's just in the same room, and that just kills the kids. It
Yeah.
really, it's a brutal hole. And so get therapy. If you have good friends, like make sure you have somebody that you can talk to, especially someone who maybe has been through it before. um, Exercise. I know it sounds funny, but like
No, it doesn't.
really,
That's helped me get through my craziness.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, like I'm a runner, and it really helps me to get out in nature and move because it's just a really hard situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for that. It is, none of this is easy, and even with your own story, it's so complex. Like, there's no happily ever after. Like, even after you see your dad again, like, everything's wonderful. Like, it's just not. It's
It's
not.
not. It's just. It's. Yeah. It's not. There's no such thing as the 48 hours love story. It's just doesn't. Life doesn't work like that. And but I think that one of the things that was really important for me was I did not want to be a victim, and you are a victim if you're in a situation where maybe you're getting abused or whatever it is, but you don't have to stay a victim. And you can't let that define you. And you just have to move forward and move past it, however it is you can with whatever resources. Because I do have people in my family that never got out of the I'm a victim role and they feel sorry for yourself. And I realize no one's going to help me until I learn how to help myself.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, that's really it.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. All right. So, Steve, how can people find this
Yeah,
or you?
yeah. You're great, Lisa, too. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I appreciate you reading it. And yeah, on Amazon, just pretend they're dead. Eichenblatt, Eichemblatt. Just throw it in there. You'll find the book. Um, and also like I'm available if anybody needs advice on something or just wants to hear more. Just you can find my email and you can track me down and I try to help people like as much as I
Okay.
can.
Where can they
So
find your email or how can they track
it's
you down?
it's yeah, I'm in Florida. I'm a lawyer in Florida, and it's if you go to I have my own personal website, which is www.stevenscotteichenblatt.com. So if you need a referral for a lawyer in your town, even I'm on a lot of listservs, so I can usually track somebody down. So at least you get a reliable name, because you do get what you pay for, and it
Mhm.
really is true. And a bad lawyer can put you in the worst place than you are now.
Oh, we
um
know. We know.
yeah, I'm sure you do. But you want a lawyer that's going to be direct and honest even when it's painful,
Yeah.
because there's certain things you have to hear, and you need somebody that's going to deliver the message to you. So yeah, I mean, you can find me. But yeah, my book will be on Amazon. It's on Amazon. You can track it down, and
Yeah. I'm gonna hold
Lisa
it up
will
one more
Lisa
time.
will give you. Yeah, yeah. No, that's great.
Yeah, but thank you so much, Steve. This has been such a pleasure. I mean, a heartbreaking pleasure. But I want to get you back on it because I want to go into the whole custody evaluation stuff if you want to, because that's a big
Sure.
issue here with properly
Uh,
presenting and not letting that anger come through. I think it would be
Yeah,
helpful.
I have plenty of stories, most of them not, heartbreaking, but yeah, I've seen it, man, I've
Yeah.
seen it. So I would love to be on anytime, Lisa, really.
All right. Well, I'm gonna contact you if it comes
Yeah,
back.
yeah, I'm a man of my word. You would not believe.
I see.
I definitely am. I am that, even if you don't like it, I am. So,
No, it's
it's
good.
like, yeah, it's like I do have one line, like a line, like my ex-wives. I got along fine with them because I wasn't like a cheater or anything like that. They just said Steve's a really nice guy. He just doesn't know how to be like the intimate, emotional part. I struggle with, but I'm better now. So
Yeah, it's
anyway,
interesting because I'm sure that's a result of all of this stuff.
yeah, oh yeah, no, absolutely. I'm
Yeah,
better now though. My wife's awesome, so it's good.
yeah,
You
yeah.
would like
That's
her.
good. I know, I know.
Yeah.
All right, well, maybe next time we get down to Florida, we'll bring you up.
Oh, oh yeah, absolutely. We're fun too.
I bet.
All
All right, Steve. Well, thank you
right.
again
All
so
right.
much,
You're
and we'll talk
welcome.
soon.
All right. Great.
Okay,
Take care.
you
Bye.
too. Bye.